Alright everybody, welcome to another episode of Fire, Flower, and Fur. If you have watched our little video we did that introduces my wife and I and some of the things we talked about, you know that there was a time that I spent where I raised 3 kids by myself as a single parent, and one of the biggest things I wanted to do with them was to introduce them to different flavors and stuff, so we weren't always doing, the macaroni and cheese and stuff like that. I learned a lot of things along the way, and I've learned a lot of things since then. And my wife and I have been very, we want to learn, as much as we can about things like that. One thing I really enjoy is I enjoy Italian food. Now, when you get into the discussion about authentic Italian and things like that, I mean, it's the stuff that we do is not authentic. It's just the basis of the red sauce and the things that go along with it, the pastas, all that stuff like that. But the one thing I've always really liked is manicotti. Now, I'm not talking the stuff in the shells and things like that. I'm talking when you go to the store and you buy these pre-made pasta tubes, which are fine. I really enjoy them. They're easy to use. They're easy to find. However, what I've discovered is that I like to do things. I'm a tinkerer. I like to figure out how things work or how to do things a different way, just because that's the way I am. What I also discovered is along the way, I come up with my own pasta recipe, homemade pasta recipe. The base on that is semolina flour, all-purpose flour, eggs, salt, olive oil. And the thing I really like, if you can, learn how to make homemade pasta, just because the homemade pasta that I make, and I don't know if it's all this way, but the stuff I make, even though it's full of semolina flour, which is, it's a very dense dough. It's a very heavy, dense dough, the pasta dough that I make. However, what I have discovered is when you eat it, it doesn't sit as heavy in your stomach as the commercial stuff that you buy. And once again, that's fine. It's just that I don't like feeling so weighed down, even though obviously I do eat more than I should. However, by making my own pasta, I've discovered this recipe that I have, even though I'm not making a light version of it. I mean, it's fairly dense, like I said, but to eat it and after the fact, it just sits really well. It goes good with just about anything. I make spaghetti out of it. I make lasagna noodles, fettuccine, just anything else we can out of it. What I wanted to do several years ago, I got thinking, well, I really, really like manicotti. I don't mind the shells part of it. I really like the tubes, and I watched videos online of the people that make them, the manicotti shells, where it's a really thin dough. It's a very liquidy dough, and you fry it. And for me, I don't like that texture. I've got some things. I don't eat squash just because I don't like the texture. It has nothing to do with the flavor. I actually really like the flavor. My mother used to make squash with bacon and onions, and I love the smell. But for some reason, the texture of squash just really turns me off, and the way those manicotti shells are made, where you actually put them in a pan and fry them, and they're basically like a crepe. That's the word I'm looking for. They're kind of like a crepe. So what I wanted to do was come up with a way to make my own shells, and I found a way a few years ago, and basically it's just using my normal pasta dough recipe. So what I do, I make my own pasta dough. And I make it into sheets. This is just off the KitchenAid, and I will say that when I use the KitchenAid, I have just the pasta roller, and I roll these out to a setting of 3. They're quite thick because, of course, they have to hold up to what you're doing. A couple of things about this: when you do these, I like to square them off. They work out better. You don't have to mess with one end or the other. This one's a little crooked, but it doesn't matter. It'll still work. So I kind of wanted to duplicate what these tubes are. So what I did is I went down to our local big box hardware store. I just got a piece of 1/2-inch PVC. I marked it for the length and the width. What I found out is with the length of this, if you run these through a KitchenAid, through the pasta roller on a KitchenAid, the width of the KitchenAid is basically the same as that. If you look at that, that's pretty close. So as long as when you roll the dough out, it goes from end to end on the pasta roller with the KitchenAid, the width this way is about correct. So what I had to come up with is figure out the circumference of things and try to figure out, I don't want to make them too big, make them too small. I do like using these just because I like the size. When you put them in a pan, it's fine. So I just figured out the circumference of these when you go around this way, they're right about 4 inches. So I just put another mark on here that shows the width. And by doing that, you can just go through. I just like to just put a little mark with my fingernail. A little mark. Another little mark. And this one's going to be a little bit off on that end. Swap glasses so I can see what I'm doing. And you just take, I like using a pizza cutter. You can use a knife, you can use whatever. And I've also got a piece of parchment down here because if I happen to score this countertop, my wife would have my head on a platter. So we'll just cut those kind of in that where those marks are. Bigger, smaller, doesn't really matter. And there you go. So like I say, those aren't really super even, but they'll work. And once again, grab another sheet. Now I will say, when I make this dough, what I do is I let this sit after I've rolled it out. I let it sit for about a half hour or so because I want one side of this to be a little bit dry. It makes it easier to work with. It doesn't stick. The bottom side is a little bit stickier. And I'll show you how that works or why I do that in a little bit. But once again, take our mark. And using our fingernail, we'll just put a little mark there. If you can see those marks there. There. That one's going to work out just about right, so that'll give us 4 out of that. So, once again, take a pizza cutter, and if I was being a little more careful about this, I'd actually, find a way to make a straight edge out of that. We discovered that one's going to be a little short, isn't it? Because if we took the width of that, so we got the length, but the width, that actually works out. So, this again is going to be a little bit long. Take just a touch off the end of that. And there you go. So I will finish cutting these. And when I do, I'll show you how to roll these into tubes and make them, or how we can roll them up, and I'll show you how that all works. So we'll be right back. Okay, so I've finished cutting these off, and if you look at these, they're all, they're fairly consistent. There's a few of them that are a little too narrow. I wouldn't be able to roll those big enough to make a tube, so I've kind of left those out. The dough I make, depending on how you make it, you should be able to get anywhere from like 13 to 16 tubes out of this, which is just however it works out. I weighed this once, and I think this works out to be just over, I think it's about 1.5 pounds of pasta for the one thing of the dough that I use. Anyway, okay, so now we've got that. So when we go to roll these, once again, we grab my little gauge here. And so you notice that the long end is going to be the length, and this would be the width. So when we roll these, we want to roll them so they're longer this way than they are wide this way, and that's self-explanatory. What I've got here also, I've got a little bit of egg wash. That's just, I use the same thing here, and I'll show you here what we do. So take a fork and just lightly score this edge right here. Put your gauge in there, and then if you fold this over, lay this on the part or whatever you're doing, the parchment or whatever, score that edge as well. So you can see I've got the marks there for the scoring, so you got them there and there. Take a little bit of the egg wash, run it there, a little bit right here, and then if you take that and you just roll that onto itself, just so you get a good overlap where that scoring was. Then, this one I've got a little bit tight on at one end, and it doesn't really matter because it'll still work out. Then with this PVC piece, if you just give it a nice little roll, just enough to get it to stick together. That out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. Just enough to get that to stick together. Pull that out, and just take your thumb and your forefinger and just mash those together a little bit. The egg wash will help keep those together. Make sure the inside's good and tight, and you will get these little ridges on here, which is fine. These little points, which is fine. Mash those together, and I'm going slow on this just so it doesn't make that, we can see what I'm doing. So there you go, I pushed that together. Now, what you'll see here, and you can see it in this camera here, what you can see here is I've got these dowels. I went down and bought, this is a 1/2 inch PVC. These are 3/4 inch dowels. I've sanded them good and smooth, just so there's not anything sticking up. And this is kind of a makeshift thing to keep them off the countertop. We moved into this house, and the things that I had before I can't find. They're still buried in a box somewhere. Anyway, so what you want to do, you can take these and just run the tubes down onto those, and just leave it at that. Keep them off the ground. I'll do a couple more of these. Once again, take a fork, just score it. Once again, this is the side that's a little bit dry. Now, you don't want them to be too dry, because if they're too dry, the scoring on the fork isn't going to work that well. And when you go to put them together, the egg wash just, won't soak in very good. So there's a bit of a timing thing that you have to deal with on this. We've scored that. A little bit of the egg wash. A little bit more on that. A little bit of the egg wash. Do it on this side as well. And you go to fold it. Just basically put the edge right there where you can roll that over. Mash that a little bit with that PVC, with that little pipe. This one, I kind of screwed that up, but you can fix that. And then just mash it together with your thumb and your forefinger. Once again, you will get some of these will separate a little bit right there, and that's fine. You can fix them. And you got to kind of, work with these fairly quick, because the more they dry, the harder this gets. But just get a nice good seam on that. You can see how I've got that good seam on there. It's going to stick together pretty good. And once again, just stick it on there. Now, I will say that the diameter of these is a little bit bigger than this piece here. This one we used as a gauge, which is fine. It all works the same. So, do one more. Once again, you want to score this edge. You got to kind of hurry through these. I can feel these are starting to dry out. It's cold and we've got the furnace on, so it's plenty warm in this house right now. Okay, so that's done. A little gob of the egg wash. Lay that down. A little gob of the egg wash. Bring this up. Line that up with the other edge there. Roll it over. Just a nice little push. Pull that out. And there you go. Now, you don't want to roll it tight over this. You don't want to crank it over or put this on to where this is sitting tight against it, because if you do, you'll basically never be able to get this off. Especially if it's a little bit sticky on that side. But once again, if you let these dry a little bit, they're dry enough, and that's part of the deal, is you want these to be able to work. You want to be able to work with these, while they're still a little bit pliable, but not so dry that they're sticky and tacky. And that's also going to depend on the type of dough you have. So, go ahead and throw that on there. Okay, so those are there. Now, the one thing I want to mention is the reason I do this, and one thing I also do on this, when I roll these up here, I do it with the seam side up to start with. And there's a method behind it. There's a method to that madness. Just simply because if you get that egg wash or something on there, what I'll do is I'll let these dry for about a half hour, and then I'll roll them 180 degrees and let them dry for another 15, 20, 30 minutes, just depending on what we're doing. We do boil these. I do boil these just enough to just activate the stuff in the dough. And if you don't let them dry a little bit, they have a tendency to really come apart. Also, if you don't roll them, sometimes that egg wash or the dough itself will kind of soak onto the wood. You can use PVC. I've used PVC before. Don't really like using it. So that's basically the gist of that whole thing. So I'll finish these tubes up and then let them sit for about 30 minutes. I'll roll all of them over about 180 degrees so the seam is down. That gives the areas that are up against the wood a chance to dry just a little bit more. And then after that happens, we'll go ahead and boil them, fill them, and so we'll just see what happens from there. Anyway, I'll go ahead and get these finished up, and then we'll come back and I'll show you. We'll boil them, we'll fill them, and we'll cook them. So my wife has made the Sunday gravy, the red sauce. That's just a good meat sauce. A little note on that. This is a recipe that I came up with, several years ago. And it's really good. My wife took the recipe, and because of the method that she does, hers is a lot better than mine. So anytime we do the dinners like this on Sunday, I always have her make the sauce because hers is a lot better. Can't tell you what she does different other than just something in the method, but she uses the exact same ingredients and everything's basically the same, but for some reason hers turns out so much better than mine. Anyway, I'll get the rest of these tubes finished up and then we will come back in about an hour after they have dried a little bit and we will go from there. So anyway, we'll see you in a little while. Okay, welcome back. Like I said, these what I did with these is I left them on here for not quite an hour, about 20 or so minutes into it. I rolled them over. As you can see, they're not stuck to the wood, which is the whole idea, and they've got some substance to them. So what I've done here now is I ended up with 14 of them. You can say so. I've got a pot of boiling water here. It's lightly salted with some oil in it. I'll just go ahead and drop them, and I'm going to cook them all. Sometimes that's not a good idea because they're pretty heavy, but we're only going to cook them for a couple of minutes. All we need to do is just get them to soften up and just activate the flours and stuff in them. So the nice thing about this is you can just grab this stick and just slide them right in the pot. Hear them? As I say, we're going to do them all. This might not be a good idea because there might not be enough room in that pan for all of them, but in the interest of time. And I'm only going to cook them for just a couple of minutes. All I want to do is just get them soft and where they're going to start to float. So while that's happening, and the pot is not a rolling boil, all I'm doing is it's just a nice easy boil. Goes out of the way. Now while that's happening, I'll prep the pan, and this is just a good old glass Pyrex pan, just whatever you decide to use. I like to start with just putting a little bit of cooking spray on it, just because it makes cleanup easier. And then what I'll usually do is I'll take one of these small cans or a half a can of a 15-ounce can. So this is whatever it is. Read it. So I got the wrong glasses on. Which I'll swap those because you'll be able to see what the hell I'm doing. So this is an 8-ounce can. I'll go ahead and pour that in the bottom. I'll take a spoon. I have to figure out this house using a drawer. And I'll just spread that around. Just put that on the bottom. That just kind of helps with the drill. No purpose in it other than I just don't want to have to try to put meat sauce in the bottom and then deal with all the lumps and everything that's going to come with that. But the nice thing about this is it'll cook up nice. It'll kind of give I wouldn't call it a crust, but kind of a nice little base when it cooks because it'll thicken up a little bit. And when you go to cut it out, it'll kind of hold things together. So there's our pan. Those are cooking. Stir them just a little bit, and they're almost pretty much done already. So once those are done, I do have a pan lined with parchment paper. The worst thing about this is when you pull these out, they are getting sticky, so you really don't want them to be touching each other. You're going to want a colander. And what I like to do first thing is I like to get the water good and hot. So when you rinse them off with hot water, and then I'll throw a little bit of cold water on them to get them to stop cooking. They're cooking pretty fast. So just another 40 seconds or so. They're cooking fast. Looks like they're holding together good. Now you might end up losing one or two of these, but it's all right. You can still use the shells. I mean, it's just going to be that much harder to fill them, but we'll get to that in just a second. So we've got good hot water going there. Go ahead and pull them out. That's all it took to cook them, as far as I'm concerned. A little bit of salt, a little bit of oil in there that'll help the flavor a little bit, and also help them from sticking together. So here with just a little bit of hot water, just to kind of help rinse them off. And I'll hurry and switch that to cold. This is hotter than hell. Kind of helps slow it so they don't cook anymore. Okay, so we've got our tubes. Drain a little bit. Now, you can do whatever you want on these pans, but I like just to lay down some parchment just so they don't stick to the pan. And they kind of stick to themselves, but if you can pull them out and kind of keep the tubes open a little bit. Just lay them out on something that's going to not allow them to come together. Yeah, it's going to be a little tough out. We got it. This is the thing, you got to work kind of fast with these, otherwise they start to dry out too much, or they sit in the pan too long, or they sit in the column too long. They will start sticking to themselves and each other, but you know, it works fine. When I use the store-bought ones, I actually don't boil those. I actually just throw them in uncooked because they will cook in the pan. It takes longer to cook when you do that. So this, I just got a few more that aren't going to fit on this cookie sheet. I'll just lay them right there. We can wipe that off later. Okay, so there we have our tubes. All right. I can just lay that on top of that for now, and they won't stick to each other. All right, so how to get the stuff inside the tubes. This is the fun part. And of course, we're having to move kind of fast because we'll get this done. You don't necessarily need a piping bag. You can just get you just a good old plain old just a bag, just a Ziploc bag. And what we've done, all I've done here, she's cut the corner out of it. I don't know if you can see that, but she's cut the corner out of it. So we'll just load this up with the stuff. While we're doing this, you kind of want to be careful doing this too, because those tubes are still going to be really hot. In fact, I'm going to put some gloves on. I think, after all this time, I'd have learned by now to grab gloves before we get started, but of course, me being me. So, depending on how many tubes you have and the size of your pan is how you're going to lay them down. So, get the air out of that. If you grab one of the tubes, just kind of push it and hold it open. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to do this from each side. So we want to fill it about halfway from this side. And if you watch, if you look, you probably won't be able to see this on camera. You'll actually see it move its way down in. So it's about right there. So we'll flip it over. Do it again. And there we go. And there you have a full tube. Well, I like to lay those seam side down if we can, or at least to one side. Don't lay them up. Here where you can see that in the camera. Hope you can see that in the camera. And if you stick your finger up in there, you can feel it when it gets about halfway. So see, I got a little bit on that, so I know it got about halfway. And just go the other direction until you get it to the end, and that's it. One more. Stick your finger in there, and you feel it gets there. Flip it over. Okay, so we will continue finishing these or filling these tubes, and then we'll get her in the oven. So, perfect. So yeah, you can see that it's, you know, you can without, I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but there's no gap in there. It filled the entire thing. Just go ahead and lay them in there.
One thing you may want to mention is that you don't want to jam that in there like that, because especially the second time through, because it traps air in it.
Yep.
So when you pour it in, turn it toward the camera. When you pour it in, you need a little bit of a space, because I mean, you know,
yeah,
it makes sense if you think about it. You don't want to trap that air pocket.
Absolutely. So basically,
so the first time you can push it all the way in.
Yeah. If you
but
do
the
it
second time. The second time you need to leave a tiny bit of a gap for the air pocket to come out, and then it feels it better.
Yeah, and she's absolutely right, and you'll be able to see that and feel that when you do this. So if we can do it this way, you can see how she's basically got a good seal here, so it makes it halfway through, pushes the air out the other end. If you do it on this side and try to seal it too much, and what happens is you might end up actually splitting the tube because there's just no place for the air to go. And these actually turned out really good. I'm actually really pleased the way these turned out. As you can see, they filled really good. all the way through. And anyway, we'll go ahead and get the rest of these filled up, and we'll come back and add the sauce and get it in the oven. So stay tuned. Okay, so we got the tubes filled. The amount that I made of the filling, by the way, is just, it's a very simple, it's ricotta, mozzarella, Parmesan, some Italian seasoning, parsley, oregano, salt, pepper, and just
Garlic?
garlic powder, and just a splash of onion powder, and just a splash of heavy whipping cream, just to kind of help, thin it out a little bit, make it carry a little bit better as you're filling the tubes. I do need to mention, you also got to understand that I am not trying to do anything that would be considered to be authentic by any means. The closest I've been to anything that could be considered authentic is I had a really good friend that was actually Sicilian. He was from New York, and I always figured that if you tied his hand behind his back, he'd go completely mute. But he was a really good cook, and he taught me some things, and just a super good guy, and I miss him to death. He's still alive. I just haven't talked to him. Well, I think he's still alive. I haven't heard anything to the contrary. He kind of packed up and left one day, and that was it. The closest I've been to anything Italian is I've got like a 6 times great grandpa that was Italian. He immigrated from Italy, landed in New Orleans, ended up in Canada, come back down to where we are now. Or if you count all the time I spent at the foreign shops in Vegas in Caesar's Palace. And other than that, that's about it. So just the stuff I put together, once again, I've learned, just by reading, going on the internet, lots of trial and error. But, it turns out pretty good. It's good for us. You can see how nice those tubes turned out. I thought when I originally did them, they were not quite uniform, but they're actually quite uniform. They're very, they're still pliable, but they're good, solid. One thing I would ask is anybody that actually reads this and wants to put something in the comments, I've yet to figure out a good way to make these and store them long term. I don't know if it's a good idea to dry them completely out like you see the store-bought ones. I don't know if you could freeze them or refrigerate them. I'm sure you could refrigerate them for an amount of time, but then reconstitute them, however you do that. But regardless, this is where we're at. So this is the red sauce my wife made. Once again, this is our recipe, but her version of it always turns out a lot better than mine. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to pour this over the top, spread it out as best I can, and it's not going to be pretty because I am a meat fan. This sauce is just, it's ground beef, sausage, spices, just your basic stuff like that, but it is really good. It's a little sweet without being overly sweet, and it's exceptional on any pasta that we make. So what I will do, I'll go ahead and put this on, get a good layer over the top of this, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cook it in a 375 oven covered for about 30 minutes. Now keep in mind that everything here is basically cooked. I mean, the only thing we're really doing is cooking the tubes a little bit more, the noodles a little bit more. More than anything, we're just warming everything up. So try to get all that covered. Okay. I'll just grab a piece of foil. Let me see the sound from this. Cover that up. Solid on there so it kind of steams itself. Like I say, 375 oven for about a half hour. You're just going to watch it, and when everything starts to kind of boil inside the pan, we'll go ahead and pull it out. We will throw some more cheese on top of it. I'm going to use some mozzarella slices and just lay on it. Probably sprinkle a little bit of mozzarella on the top. Throw it back in until the cheese melts and starts to brown up a little bit, and then it'll be dinner time. So anyway, we'll get to that. I'll show you that when we pull it out and everything's said and done. And anyway, we will be back in a little while. Back in 45 minutes or so. Okay, welcome back. All right, so here's the finished product. I ended up cooking it at 375 for just over 35 minutes, about 35 minutes covered. Then I covered it with tin foil, I pulled the cover off, and then we put a little bit of mozzarella on, put it on for about another, turned it up to 400 degrees and put it on for about another 15 minutes. So anyway, that's basically what it is. It's just, and like I say, mostly what we have here is mostly the meat sauce because we're a big fan of that. The garlic bread to go along with it. So I'm going to attempt to pull these out of the pan without tearing them to pieces. So we'll see what we can do. And if you noticed when we put these in, we put 8 of them across here, 2 going lengthwise here, and half of one here because 1, that's all the cheese we had, or the filling we had, and 2, I'm hoping that, right, even with these slices of cheese that I put on here, we're actually going to end up getting 2 of them right there, and it feels like they are. So let's see if we can dig this out of there, causing all kinds of hell. Now, if we weren't doing this for the posterity of the video, we'd basically just dig into them and say to hell with it, but not going to work this time. So that should be 2 of them right there. Lord dang, pray for us. Come on.
Yeah, baby.
All right, there you go. And that made a bit of a mess, but
because I'm a cheese whore.
Yep, and we are cheese people. So we'll a little bit of that on there. Wipe the plate off so it looks pretty. Could look prettier. But you can see those tubes held together really well. I don't know how well you can see that. But it's hot. It's hot. But if we take a knife, cut into that a little bit. So we cut into this tube right here, which is very nice and light. You can see, kinda. So there's the tube, there's the filling. That turned out really good. I'm actually really pleased with that. Sometimes this is kind of hit and miss depending on how you fill it, how you fill the tubes, but anyway, that turned out really good. So, again, it's a quick down and dirty dinner. A couple of pieces of bread, throw some cheese on there. If you use a hand roller, you have to kind of gauge that. But when they're a little bit thick like that, because they're so big, well, not necessarily big, but you've got a big piece of something in there with filling and everything. You want it to be able to hold together when you dig it out. So, what are you doing?
That would be Italian seasoning. Calm down.
I'm calm. I didn't have a glass of it. I couldn't what the hell you're doing.
I was adding some sparkle.
Adding some. Anyway, if you have any questions, let us know. Once again, hardly traditional by any stretch of the imagination, but it throws together a lot of things that we both really like. The pasta, the meat, the cheese. Both really big cheese people. Just throw them together as best you can. And so that's that. So anyway, once again, thank you for joining us for another episode of Fire, Flour, and Fur. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any comments, please comment. Anything we can do, you think we can try to do things a little better, a little different. Really want to hear it. We really want to try doing different things if we can. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.